Before the podcast, we'd like to give a shout out to our charity partner, Regeneration Brainery. Set up by the property industry for the property industry, the not-for-profit Regeneration Brainery works with thousands of young people from underrepresented backgrounds every year to give them access to life-changing careers in the property industry. Find out more or get in touch by visiting www.regenerationbrainery.co.uk. Now, enjoy the podcast.
Hello and welcome to Scheming, the Place North podcast that gives property folk a platform to talk about three schemes they think about a lot. I'm your host, Dan Whelan, Deputy Editor of Place Northwest. My guest today is part of Liverpool City Council's new era. She was drafted in with an exciting brief to help unlock the city's undoubted potential after years of underperformance. She also boasts an eclectic and impressive CV that has seen her travel the globe and work in some of the world's most famous cities. Joining me today to talk about the three schemes that she thinks about a lot is Nuala Gallagher, Corporate Director of City Development at Liverpool City Council. Nuala, welcome to the pod.
Thank you very much for having me. It's lovely to be here.
Brilliant. So let's, before we kick off with the three schemes, I just wanted to ask you, you've been in post 18 months now. And as I mentioned in the intro there, you were kind of drafted in at a very exciting time for the City Council, embarking on this new era, opening the doors to investment. How's it going?
It's going really well. It's going great. Lots of good stuff happening. It's been really exciting. It's been hard work. I think we've had a lot to do in the city to reach out to people, to set, I would say, a new tone for the city, to re-establish relationships. That's all been really positive. We have quarterly developer forums. We have a good engagement in that. We have site out to market now to Invest Gardens. We've had a lot of interest in that. So it's going well. I think we're getting our house in order. We're doing lots of interest in, I think, things to actually set a baseline for the city, waterfront plan, other SPDs. We're working with Strategic Futures panel as well in terms of some of the outcomes from that report. So it's going well. It's an exciting time, and there's so much potential and opportunity in the city that I love the job. You know, there's easier gigs, I'll say, but it's a great job.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, when you and some of your colleagues were brought in, there was a lot of excitement. You know, Liverpool's going in the right direction. And then you mentioned all the SPDs there. There's been a lot of kind of framework put in place. Yeah. And I think, certainly from the outside, it appears that the council had to take maybe 2 steps back in order to then push on. And I think maybe there's been a bit of frustration in that interim period that things aren't moving fast enough. But, you know, you can't do it 100 mile an hour and expect to get it right. Is that fair? How do you feel like the perception from the outside has changed over the last 18 months?
Yeah, I mean, that is fair, I think. And a lot of it was us getting our house in order and actually, have we got the right information? Have we got the right proposition? What are we doing with our land? You know, stock take on all of the things that we had to do, and actually trying to get a bit of baseline and envisioning on some parts of the city as well. I suppose that what brought out is then the amount of opportunity. So a lot of that is honing the proposition that we're coming forward with now. I think, and I get it, you can strategize to death on things, and we don't want to do that. We actually want to get into delivery mode quite quickly. We want to do that with partners. I mean, we don't want to go off into darkened rooms and do strategy documents. And so, for example, on St George's Gateway, we're working with Liverpool John Moores University and National Museums as big landowners, and doing it with them. And a lot of this is around engagement with landowners. If we're doing SPDs, how do you get viability brought into that so we can get quicker on delivery and development? I think we're racking up some schemes that are going to go to market quite soon as well. And it is going to be in delivery mode. We're doing a lot of work around housing numbers and the potential, I think, that the city has got. We were a city for 1 million people. You know, we're just over 500,000 now, and we're growing. So in terms of the government's targets on housing numbers, we are well placed to actually say we can deliver a lot in the city. Yeah.
You mentioned that there's easier gigs out there. What was it about the job that appealed to you?
I love the city. Actually, the bones of the city are incredible. I mean, the waterfront's amazing. I think the general topography of the city is amazing. We have more listed buildings, I believe, than any other city outside of London. I'm going to continue to use that. So the architecture and the heritage is incredible. But also, I mean, I think the people in Liverpool, they're just they're salt of the air is actually really good, good crack, I would say, good fun. And I think they deserve a good city, and I think I do. I have a brother who's been here 20 years.
Okay.
So I knew the city. I mean, as opposed to, like you said, I've worked in other cities where I just went there and didn't really know anyone. I knew the city, and I'd been visiting for about the guts of 20 years, and saw the change and the opportunity and the potential, and it's an incredible city. I think you don't get opportunities everywhere to work with. I mean, I just think the natural landscape that you've got here, the waterfront's incredible. I mean, I think there are massive opportunities too with the canal going into North Liverpool, all of that area. It's just incredible city.
And you mentioned some of the that you've worked in a lot of different cities. So New York, Dublin, London, Bristol, Limerick, Liverpool, Belfast. That is quite the CV, isn't it? And lots of waterfront cities there as well.
Yeah.
So you clearly have, on your CV, you're probably the right person for the job. I think it's fair to say. Aside from Liverpool, of course, which has been the most exciting place to work in out of those cities that I listed?
I mean, New York obviously was exciting, and I mean, you would walk sometimes down the street in Manhattan, and it would take your breath away when you turn the corner with the way the sun would open up the light in the streets. My work in New York was in the private sector for a bit, and then in a non-profit sector in a low-income area in East New York. So you got to see, I would say, some of the harsher realities of the city.
Yeah.
So it was exciting in one way, but I mean, I actually love working in London too. I mean, in some sense, I found it easier to work in London, or in a sense, but also when I worked in Newham. I came in 2012. It was just post-Olympics, and there was so much happening in Newham at the time that it was an incredible time to be there. I learned a ton there, and it was great. All the way to stuff that was happening with the Olympic Park, the LLDC, Canning Town, Customs House, the Royal Docks, setting up the Enterprise Zone. All of that. I mean, I liked all the cities I've been in. I mean, Belfast and Bristol were great. Limerick too. It was interesting going back to Ireland for a bit.
Yeah,
I'd been out of it, and actually it's a very different way of working as well then. So, but it was, I mean, I suppose I've come from a very small village in rural Ireland, and I just love cities, and I wanted to see a bit of the world, and that's
Fantastic. Yeah, brilliant. And final question, and this is a bit of a curveball, but you studied film?
Only on part-time, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So would you class yourself as a bit of a film buff?
I love film as a medium. I suppose it's the whole narrative and storytelling, and I do see... So I'm originally an architect, and then I went on a master's in urban design, and I'd done night class and different things in film. And I suppose it's the whole narrative. I think cities, write themselves as they read themselves, and there's a constant evolving story. And I do think all of how you frame things, and there's a bit of similar to that in film. I did work at a really strange job. I worked for an Egyptian film company in New York for a summer. After I graduated over there as a production assistant.
Oh right, wow.
They were filming in New York mainly, and DC, and it was that's a whole other day's story. It was a bit crazy, including getting been out on a disused railway line in the middle of New Jersey at night, and having the FBI, CIA, and a lot of people come and stuff like that. But that's a different day's story. So yeah,
that's for another podcast.
Yeah,
I think.
yeah.
Brilliant. Well, let's get into the scheming, shall we? So, as you know, this podcast is all about 3 schemes that you think about a lot. So let's get into that. The first scheme we're going to talk about today is the one that you're most proud of.
Yeah, this was hard because I suppose, starting out as an architect, you go through different buildings that you've directly been involved in, and then into bigger regen and development and housing schemes. But things that I love on certain projects is mean well used projects, and actually the value that something quite quick can do to an area and a place. So I mean, so I'm going to mention the Royal Victoria Beach in Newham,
Okay.
which was basically something we done for 60 grand. So we had 60 grand unhypothecated 106 monies. And we had an area that was in need of some love, essentially, and we wanted to do something with it. So quite quickly we decided, well, there was this nearly a natural inlet on the docks, and it was a really interesting area because you had the Emirates cable car go over that. You had London City Airport and the flight path going over the beach.
Okay.
The DLR train kind of wrapped around behind it.
So lots of eyes on this area.
Lots of eyes on this area, and it was an area, I suppose, that, you know, docks are difficult in general, post-industrial. And there wasn't really much amenity or open space, some businesses there, but also we were trying to link, I suppose, from the Olympic Park all the way down the Leeway, and actually how do you create like a big day out in East London too.
Okay.
But I mean, for residents, there wasn't a huge amount there. But also people coming on the cable car, the general stats that we got from TfL at the time, they weren't getting off the cable cars. They were coming from Greenwich, going over and back.
Okay.
So this had to do a number of things, you know, in terms of the area and perception. So, but it was the way we went about it. So it was done by, like, we needed planning, all of that, got that. But then we worked with the Building Crafts College up in Carpenters in Stratford. The Carpenters College it was. And we got, you know, local labour in and apprentices to help us build the project. We then hired local people that were apprentices or beach attendants rather. So everything was done through a local lens. So the added value on all of this was really good. And we had some teething trouble at the beginning, but it opened up I think in July, and the weather hit, you know, 28, 30 degrees.
And this was post-Olympics, 2013. Mm-hmm.
And all done quite quickly. You know, I think there was, I mean, it wasn't our land, it was the GLA's land. They gave us the land for free.
Okay.
Through Rodma, but we didn't have any money because I think people weren't sure how it was going to go. Anyway, it went really well.
I'm looking at some pictures of it now. It looks, well, there's some before and after pictures, and it's quite a marked difference for 60k.
Yeah, I mean, and we did stretch the money. We also then put an arts organisation in. There was another Meanwhile project further up that actually Assemble had done, the Architects Assemble.
Okay.
But then we programmed these with an arts organisation who had to work with local people. And then there was local employment done within it too. But some of the businesses around there in the restaurants, I mean, they're taking it up by about 200%.
Wow.
Based on this. People came off the cable car and started to go down
because they saw it when they were on the cable car.
You could see it on it, so there was something happening. There was a wakeboarding facility there already, so this added to and then it got residents from Canning Town as well, that a lot of them used to work at the docks, and there was still a population that had been there for years, as well as incoming resident and with new development. But then they called it the Canning Town Beach and, you know, established a Facebook group. So it became something that actually had a lot of attention on it quite quickly, and then was quite loved by them. So we were going to take it away that year because we didn't have money to keep it. But then we saw the value in that. We done like service with local residents, and they all wanted to keep it. So we decked over it. And then in fair play to the GLA, they came in with some of the developers and funded it for the next year. But also it was the type of thing that, you know, there wasn't a lot going on in the area. I mean, there's a lot more happening now, and I think Dan Bridge and the crew down in the docks are doing lots of good work, and Dan's from Liverpool too, by the way. But it evolved then year on year. It got bigger and better.
Okay.
And it's then getting into that thing of how you start to use the water and a broader conversation across London about the use of water amenity space. We're getting into, I suppose, hotter summers on lots of these. But it was just that small, bit of money and thinking, and then turning something meanwhile into something that actually adds a massive amount of value.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely. No, it's a fascinating project, and you know, you were kind of involved at the very infancy of that, and now it is still going on, right? Having a look here, there's sort of adverts for this summer just gone.
Yeah,
and it's kind of grown and evolved from that small 60k starting point. On that point of how we use water, obviously London has its issues, but also all over the UK, you know, we're criticised for not using bodies of water or waterfronts well enough. Liverpool has a very famous waterfront. A lot of it is primed for redevelopment as Liverpool Waters, and Salford Quays as well. There's a plans for a floating hotel there. I think there's a floating sauna planned down at the docks here in Liverpool.
Planning, it's done as a way.
How much of a focus is that for you in terms of, you know, what you did in Newham in that space? And are you able to sort of take a bit of that and activate the waterfront here in Liverpool maybe?
Yeah, I mean, it's a massive focus, I think, for us. I mean, so we've gone out and procured a waterfront plan, like a consultancy waterfront plan. So we have West 8 actually with BDP doing that. You know, the early things that are emerging out of that are looking really, really good. Okay. I mean, and that's a plan, not a strategy, because we want this to have some teeth. Mm-hmm. We're also working with others on the waterfront that likes appealing that to a bit of activation on it. And there's some really interesting conversations going on there about what will emerge out of that. But it is, I mean, people do swim in the docks. I do myself actually here down.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you can swim in Prince's Dock and you can swim down in the waterfront centre. It's open tomorrow.
Okay.
But
wetsuit required? Or can you brave it?
Oh yeah, no, I think you should go in your skin. I would say it's what you're not in. I'm not in long, to be honest. But I mean, I think it's use of water. I think COVID also brought this home to us, like what's in your area and actually what's the amenity. And I think lots of people got used to their area more and actually would start to do things you weren't going off.
Yeah, people got to know their area better and what was on offer. Yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
But I also think, as you're moving into, particularly, we've got lots of docklands across, the country, between containerization and other things that have happened. What do you do with this space? And a lot of that is trying to then, we're moving into things, I suppose, post-COVID as well, where you can choose to live and work anywhere, within reason. Yeah. And so but what's your amenity space, the experience, the leisure, health, I think is becoming a big thing. How do you connect the waterfront back up to people and actually make it user-friendly? So, I mean, and I think we have an incredible opportunity within Liverpool because we had the first wet docks in the world, actually, in Liverpool. But then you've got all of these series of docks, like rooms, that are, just how do you start to use and activate them? So Peel have some plans down in their area. We've got, some over in King's Dock and others. And I think it's great, the general projects as well, too, in Albert Dock. And those guys are really ambitious too. And having, we're all in conversations with Canal and Rivers Trust to look after the water. But I think it's an untapped potential in a way. I think we haven't touched the sides of what we can do there, particularly the fact that when you've got still bodies of water with enclosed docks, you can do a lot more. And I also think the canal too, when you start to go up to North Liverpool as well, is incredible. And again, and we've had conversations too with Sefton about how do you start to, residents or others don't see boundaries on that, but how do we start to work across that?
Sure. Very exciting. Well, we'll watch this space for some more waterfront plans coming forward. Okay, fantastic. A good start. Let's move on to the second scheme that we're going to talk about today, the one you wish you had done. So some people have interpreted this in different ways. It could be one that someone else did that you admire. Or it could be one that you were involved in but never came to fruition. So how have you interpreted this, the scheme that you wish you had done?
Yeah, I mean, I've sort of got an example in each.
Excellent.
And it's really hard to pick one as well because, there's so many amazing things out there that you could, on different days you think, actually, I would love to have done all of it. I think... Well,
we say this podcast is about 3 schemes. It normally ends up being about 6 or 7, so it's absolutely fine. Yeah.
I mean, I think on one end, things that I wish I'd been involved in that I really admire, I think, and it's quite an old scheme now, but Borneo's Sparenburg in Amsterdam, when they done the housing scheme on the docks and actually the approach that was taken on the various elements of housing and how it was set up, like the old Amsterdam sort of elevation and the sizing and scale was really interesting, and that's something that I think there's a lot of lessons, even that was some of the dock space, how that was used. And then I suppose when I was in New York as well, for a few years, I saw a lot of changes too around Brooklyn. When I lived in Brooklyn for a few years, particularly around Dumbo and the parks, and they'd done some amazing stuff in the parks along the waterfront. And there's a building when I went back recently there as well, the Empire Building, which is near the Brooklyn Bridge, but it's an old building, and how they've done the reuse of this old building is I think there's a lesson in it about the adaptive reuse, and sort of a park goes up through the building, and they've opened up floors that are accessible. And I just think it's a different approach to how you maybe leave some of the the outer walls and have that publicly accessible and let other things spill into it. So that was an interesting project that you think, it would have been, and the aspect of it is really good just in terms of where it's situated. So I mean, that's two things that I would admire.
Let's take them each in isolation. So Borneo-Sporenburg. So to the untrained eye, it looks as if it's kind of a residential neighbourhood and a modern interpretation on the old classic Amsterdam streetscape.
You've said it better than I do.
I'd encourage anyone who wasn't familiar with this to have a look, because it is fascinating, because it kind of goes against what you see quite a lot in the UK, which is the same kind of style of building next to each other. If you think of large housing estates, these are all similar but different in their own ways. And is that something that could be replicated in the UK? Because it seems like there's nothing like this, as far as I'm aware, in the UK.
Yeah. Well, I think it could be. I mean, I think that's something that the Dutch as well do quite well on this. I mean,
they're always held up, aren't they, as an example of how to do urban design.
But I remember having a conversation with some Dutch equivalents who work in local government, and they talk about experimenting and trials, and they've done this and they've done that pilot, and we had a conversation. This was with other people from the UK regions about how they can do things and trial things and be allowed to fail. And I think you don't have the same leeway here about being allowed to fail.
Okay.
In a sense, I mean, that was I suppose the culmination of that conversation we had with them. But I do think it is about you can set up frameworks and people can then do individual interpretations of things. I mean, they had those different architects come in and done elements of that, but it is, I mean, I think we could do a lot more of that, and some of this is getting, quality up, but individualization. But some of it is like and certain architects would leave parts of a building left undone, like window frames or something that you could actually, the owner could come in and say, well, I want to place it this way. So
sort of customize it.
And I think it's, I think we're in a situation too where we need to get a lot of housing done quite quickly. So how do you start to do it? Quite quickly, I think there's opportunities in terms of how you do modular construction, how to do some of this as well, so that, you get that quality, you get that, individualism on it. But I suppose it's a way of looking at, our streetscapes, height, mass and density, and actually how you start to get, I would say, good modern and development and design into things. But also I think some of this is around the different nature and types of housing that we need. When we talk about sort of a universal, house, and actually sort of how you can, I think, adapt residential over time. I think there is things we can look at, and I suppose it's where do you push into some of that. If you look at where construction has evolved over years, you look at how we fly planes and the thickness of it and how we still build things. I think there's a whole world to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a few quick facts on Borneo-Sporenburg. So West 8 was the landscape architect. That's exciting because, as you mentioned before, they're now working in Liverpool as well.
Yeah.
2,500 homes at a density of 100 dwellings per hectare, which this article says is dense even by Dutch standards, and 30% of those for social rent as well. So fascinating project. For those listening who want to learn more, Google is your best friend. Let's take the other project that you mentioned. So the Empire Building in Brooklyn, so a retrofit project. Yeah. And you mentioned a garden sort of winding up in that building. Tell me a bit more about that.
So it's not so much a garden, I suppose, as open space or public space. So, and I think, for people that know Dumbo and Brooklyn, they've done a huge amount on the parks and the waterfront there. Mitch Silver, who is a commissioner for parks, who was a planner, I think had a big say in how some of that developed. But at a point in time, you had like a lot of industrial buildings and empty and vacant buildings there, and it was a problem area at a point in time. I suppose similar to lots of areas we have here. Some would have taken a view to maybe just demolish entirely the building.
Right.
I think in some of this is about when we go in to talk about issues of net zero and our carbon footprint within the industry. I just think it's an interesting way of how they've interpreted the building. So rather than roofing the whole building and making it into a more traditional kind of, I would say, just doing the building up, they've left parts of the building open and vacant, but it's accessed by the public.
Okay.
So you can go up into sort of a vertical space.
Right.
So that, the park on the waterfront, then you meander up. There's cafes and restaurants, and obviously there's a commercial driver within that too, and getting people up. But I think if you look at, some of the, the need to maybe retain an adaptive reuse of buildings, I think we need to be really ambitious with how we do that.
Yeah.
And some of that is like, you might leave some floors, you might take some away. But there's a whole piece of work around how we treat. I think we've got some really interesting, brutalist architecture. We've got some really interesting old car parts, and other people are doing, work on this, and in the UK too. So I think it's and not everything should be retained, and I get that. But I think there are. But I also think when we look at, listed buildings as well and how we use them, I think some of this is how do you get uses into things in a realistic way? How do you actually, because cities evolve, buildings need to evolve. And without getting into, I would say, pastiche kind of style on things, actually, how do you start to use them as something that, celebrates the heritage, but actually becomes something, for the city that opens up different views and...
Absolutely. No, it's a really interesting topic, isn't it? Because we can't just be going around knocking things down and building fresh. Like you said, the drive for sustainability in net zero buildings is massive, but we are still seeing quite a lot of demolition and rebuilds because, bottom line, a lot of retrofit projects don't stack up on a spreadsheet. That's just the reality of it. When you first mentioned that building, what came to mind was HSBC's tower at Canary Wharf. I'm sure you've seen plans for what they're planning to do with that. And that's a relatively new building, so 42-storey block. They want to basically carve chunks out of it and create green spaces within it. So we are starting to see some more imaginative thinking around retrofit, which I think is positive. And in a city like Liverpool with so many historic buildings, that's good news, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh no, it is. I mean, it's like some of the planning team would say, "What are you talking about? We're not, we're not tearing down buildings or sort of half carving them out." And I know it's not that. We've got amazing heritage, but we've got to find a way to make these buildings work, like you say. But also we've got to address some of the environmental issues that we have. And I mean, I do think there are absolute cases where these things need to come down. But I think there's an interesting way of interpreting how buildings will work. I mean, I always believe, I don't like the sort of city in the sky concept or anything, because I think people should be able to access the ground. But I also think how we use, floors of buildings and roofscapes is something that we need to get better at. I mean, green, brown, blue roofs, but also I think, the vantage points that people have in the city, but to open these up to residents, because I think a lot of the time what you get is, it's evolving. You get maybe buildings where you have a cafe or restaurant maybe on the top floor that people can visit. Some of them are expensive or not, but how do you allow people to actually get up to some of these buildings and see a different part of the city, but have that ownership piece of, if you're a resident here, that you can access it and this is my city and you can see it.
Absolutely. And it's one thing having a use that's open to the public on the top floor of a building, but making people aware that use exists as well, because that's sort of half the battle, I guess. From your background, from an architectural perspective, how important is how the skyline looks? So we talk a lot, Place Northwest, about Manchester's skyline, which has obviously changed dramatically in recent years. Liverpool also has an iconic skyline, not as tall. How important is it that you have variety in terms of design across a skyline? Because one of the criticisms of Manchester is that a lot of the design is quite samey and there's not that much variation. What are your views on that with your architect's hat on?
So, I mean, I think, what's amazing about cities is that you see, they're going to outlive us all, if climate change doesn't get the better of us. But actually how they evolve over time and like what's off its era in time. And I do think, it's an interesting, because it just says a lot about how we live in civilization, where we're at on things, about the height we went to, what the use was for. And I think we should do things that are off its time, so modern buildings and that are fit for purpose. But it adds, I think, variety and context and depth to city. But it's also about the use as well too. I mean, we do have to look at how people live as well in this, because I think a lot of it, to your point earlier, some of the stuff from Canary Wharf as well, and actually what they're doing with what was previously mainly commercial space there. So I do think, this idea of having, sort of cut off like central business districts, the residents said over here, we're going into more mixed use territory, and how is that interpreted with taller buildings? The viability challenge, and I think since Grenfell, there's always, issues, and we need to make them safe for people. Absolutely. But that, I suppose, is some of the challenge. But I think there's a massive opportunity within that to basically enhance the city, to protect the views that are there. But we've got a tall buildings policy document, and we would encourage height in areas, because we think areas lend itself to that. From a sustainable travel and transport perspective, we would encourage that, particularly around transport, like most cities do. But it's getting, I think what's come out of Manchester has been incredible, and it's gone on its own journey. There's always architectural styles maybe off their time. So I suppose you just want to encourage the best type of development coming forward at the time, and there's a range of things to balance on that. But we have projects coming forward, across the city, and at the Some Height, King Edward Triangle, that Beetham Development are working on too. It will be coming forward. So I think we'll start to see that in the city, which will be good, because it's we've got the cathedral, we've got the three graces, and let's look to do really quality buildings off their time too, and let's try to work with developers as well to actually manage the viability and to get them delivered.
Yeah. I think that scheme that you mentioned there at King Edward Triangle with Beetham might be, for some people, the thing that makes them change their perception of the city. For some people, tall buildings equals ambition and success. So I think, there's some people that have different opinions, but for a group of people who like to see these tall buildings, I think that scheme is one that they're watching really, really closely. So we'll look forward to seeing that one come forward. Fantastic. Okay, let's talk about the third scheme on today's agenda, which is the Dream Project. So you can let your imagination run wild here and tell us about your Dream Project.
Yeah. Okay, there's loads of dream projects. I think when you come out of architecture school, you're going to think you're going to change the world, and then you go and do stair details for a year, and it sobers you up. So I think, I suppose, in one sense, because you talked about, say, fantastical stuff. Years ago, I done a dissertation on poetry and architecture, and wrote to a load of poets, and Seamus Heaney wrote back and sent me some unpublished work, and so part of the whole thing that I loved there was like taking like a poem or something, and then at some point in time designing all of this fantastical stuff for poets that actually wasn't rooted in reality. So there's like an element of
a poet's neighbourhood.
Maybe something like that, but actually, how do you take, I suppose, that idea or language? The documents he sent me was about, to use the analogy of a football pitch, where you step in something and you're the player, and when you're outside and the observer. So I suppose architecture is a bit, and buildings, and by nature of the cities, the space outside or inside. I think, it would, but I think it's taken something that is about an idea or a feeling, and how do you actually visualize something in that. That's just a kind of some time in the future, when you get time, you'll do something on that.
So just to be clear, you have some unpublished Seamus Heaney poetry in your house. I assume no one else, or very few people in the world, have access to?
It's not actually a poem. He done a series of lectures in Oxford, and he had a couple of books from those lectures were published, and that when I wrote to him, I mentioned, but he sent me one that wasn't published, called "The Playthings in the Playhouse" by Robert Frost, and so he sent me this. He didn't know me, and said if anything's of interest, photocopy and send it back.
Wow.
Of course, photocopy the whole thing, and the dissertation was pretty rubbish, if I'm honest. But that whole aspect of I suppose it's I mean, a lot of this is around it's the space and what we create, and I think, you know, going back to reality of it, you know, you feel like you're a custodian of the city in a way, and it's trying to get the best you can for the city in terms of the spaces that we create and what that is, and quality and all of the stuff about the public and residents and what their needs are, but also the joy in that. And I think we need to be able to have just those quality spaces and reinterpret problem areas, which, you know, and I suppose when you go rooted in reality in a real project, I suppose some of the things that I'm excited about in Liverpool in particular is kind of building on the work we're doing in the waterfront plan and stuff that will happen in the North Docks. I think in North Liverpool in general, and there's massive opportunity in it, and I suppose the Goodness and Legacy project, which is in Everton and the community project, and they've got outline planning.
So just for those who don't know, so Everton relocating from their current home at Goodison Park to a new stadium, which is currently under construction at Bramley Moor Dock. I think it's supposed to be ready in time for the start of next season. So that's the context. But yeah, tell us a little bit more about, because we've written a lot about the new stadium, significantly less about what's going to go on in and around the old stadium. So
I mean, I'll just touch on North Liverpool and more broadly. I think North Liverpool, you know, there's been some, you know, problem areas in it, you know, for a number of years, and I think it's, I mean, it needs more investment. I think it needs, you know, some love and attention and care and really good development and overall. So we're doing work in Anfield, we're doing work around Grady Market, and there's a series of work packages across North Liverpool, and there's massive opportunity there to actually for residents to improve their lives, which is what our job is here. But I think on the Goodness and Legacy project, like you say, it's, you know, the football club are moving, and so that's going to create an economic impact there for match days, I think, for the pubs and shops and all of the area. They've got an outline planning, you know, for some resis, for some health mix and that, and so they're working on that. We're, you know, working with them. But I suppose some of the discussion we're having, say, around, you know, a toffee trail between Everton and Bramley Moor, and what does that mean and what does that involve? But also how do you maximise the impact of something like that? So we've got, you know, County Road nearby, which, you know, there's lots of thriving business on it, but there's, you know, they need improvement and investment and some assistance. So how do you intersect a toffee trail within County Road and actually create some really good public space that will actually start to change the nature of that area? And then how do you start to then take a route down that then starts to unlock land and create some of the density, maybe like in you know, the one we looked at in Amsterdam, really good quality development, but opens it up so you have a spine and then you have other things happening. And a bit like, you know, the super kiln in Copenhagen, which was like a project, you know, that was, you know, colourful, you know, it's pinks and green and all sorts of things. You know, do you do something in blue for everything? But also it's in addition to that, it's how do you start to connect the docks for people in North Liverpool? How do you start to create a legacy of where, you know, a football stadium is going out? But as part of that, where the area needs improvement, it needs additional housing, it needs, you know, all of the good infrastructure. I mean, it's something that I think, you know, we'll be working with the club, with everyone in the community, with residents there and others to look to see how we move, you know, that forward, but in a way that it needs to do more than one thing. It does lots of things.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really interesting insight into you've got two projects there, the Goodison Legacy project and the new stadium at Bramley-Moore Dock, and it's a good insight into how councils don't view those things in isolation, and you see the knock-on impact and the need to sort of join up the two schemes. And you mentioned the Superkillen in Copenhagen. Again, looking at a picture of it now, it is a lurid pink zone that kind of intersects some what looks like industrial buildings and residential, and provides a really striking space. But yes, it would certainly have to be blue, wouldn't it, if it was?
Yeah. I mean, and I'm not saying that's what we're doing. We what we want to do is look at options and do this. But I suppose it's what's the art of the possible within this, and a lot of this is, I think, the area in general. We've got a lot of heavy infrastructure there. You've got a lot of roads that cut up north to Liverpool. How do you then start to actually, create better access? That ownership piece about the waterfront, but access to jobs, access to all of that for people, but also to unlock land as you go.
Yeah, it's about priming the area as well, isn't it? So that it becomes an attractive investment to the private sector, because you kind of there, your job is to facilitate, isn't it? And then you work in partnership with the private sector to bring them in. So that's a really, really exciting one. Nuala, thank you so much for scheming with me today and talking to us about your three schemes. You've taken us all over the world. We've been to New York, Denmark, the Netherlands, and everywhere in between. Thank you very much at home for listening. Please do join us again for another episode of the Scheming Podcast.
Thank you very much for listening to the podcast. Before we go, we'd like to give a shout out to our charity partner, Regeneration Brainery. Set up by the property industry for the property industry, the not-for-profit Regeneration Brainery works with thousands of young people from underrepresented backgrounds every year to give them access to life-changing careers in the property industry. Find out more or get in touch by visiting www.regenerationbrainery.co.uk.